हेलो सौरभ, कैसे हैं आप?
बस बढ़िया। प्रणय, तुम कैसे हो? ख्याति, तुम कैसी हो?
बस ठीक है। आज किस विषय पर चर्चा करने वाले हैं हम?
हाँ, आज मुझे ऐसे लगा, अगर वो ऐसे टाइम मैगजीन या किसी मैगजीन में आता था ना कि हर साल का एक ऐसा शब्द या फ्रेज बोलते थे कि ये तो इस साल का जो सबसे महत्वपूर्ण फ्रेज है वो ये होना चाहिए। तो ऐसे मैं सोच रहा था कि अगर हम 220 या 221 के बारे में बात करें तो सबसे पहला तो होता कोविड-19
हम्म।
नेचुरली। लेकिन दूसरा शब्द या दूसरा फ्रेज जो मुझे लगता है उस लिस्ट या उस फेहरिस्त में जरूर शामिल होता, वो है ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन। क्योंकि
हम्म।
हर जगह पर वो शब्द का प्रयोग हो रहा था। और सौरभ, जैसे कि हम लोगों ने कई बार पहले भी बात की है कि जैसे कंप्यूटिंग में चिप्स वगैरह के बारे में तो कोई हम लोग उसको टेक्नोलॉजी भी नहीं समझते थे, लेकिन इस साल सबको पता पड़ गया कि टीएसएमसी नाम की कोई चीज है और उसकी
हाँ,
कितने ज्यादा महत्व है ग्लोबल इकोसिस्टम में। तो ये ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन क्या है, कैसा है, क्यों भारत का इसमें ज्यादा हिस्सा नहीं है, या है भी तो क्यों नहीं है, इन सब बारे में चर्चा करना बहुत जरूरी हो गया है। आपको लोगों को क्या लगता है?
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल। मतलब सप्लाई चेन कंपनीज एकदम जिसको बोलते हैं क्रिटिकल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर। मतलब अमेरिका वगैरह में पहली बार उनको दिखा कि भाई पोर्ट्स बैकलॉग हो गए। अभी हाल फिलहाल में भी, मतलब जिसको बोलते हैं ना कि चीन को छींक लग जाए तो पूरी दुनिया में हल्ला मच जाता है, तो लिटरली ऐसा ही हो रहा था। दो लोग, चार लोगों को छींक लगेगी तो शी साहब जो है सबको बंद कर देंगे। उसके बाद उनके पोर्ट
हाँ।
बंद हो जाएंगे, उसके बाद में सारी सप्लाई चेन बंद हो जाएगी। तो ये तो चल ही रहा है मामला इतने टाइम से, और बहुत ऊपर नीचे हो रहा है इस वजह से। तो ये
बिल्कुल।
बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय है डिस्कस करने के लिए। बिल्कुल।
तो कौन है आज हमारे गेस्ट ये विषय को हमें समझाने के लिए?
हाँ, बिल्कुल। तो हमारे पास एकदम परफेक्ट गेस्ट है इस विषय को डिस्कस करने के लिए। हमारे साथ है आज डॉक्टर शाओन रे। मैं देख रहा था कि ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन के बारे में कुछ भारत का जो परिप्रेक्ष्य है उसे समझने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए। तो उन्होंने स्मिता मिगलानी के साथ एक किताब लिखी थी 2018 में, ग्लोबल वैल्यू चेन्स एंड मिसिंग लिंक्स। तो उस किताब में काफी कुछ वर्णन किया है कि भारत का हिस्सा क्या है अलग अलग मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर्स में, ग्लोबल वैल्यू चेन में, और भारत की कमजोरियां क्या हैं, उनकी स्ट्रेंथ क्या है, वगैरह वगैरह।
तो इसी विषय पर चर्चा करने के लिए हमारे साथ हैं आज डॉक्टर शाओन रे, जो कि विजिटिंग प्रोफेसर हैं इक्रियर में, जो कि इंडिया का काफी फेमस थिंक टैंक है इकोनॉमिक्स, ट्रेड पॉलिसी वगैरह पर।
ठीक है, तो एकदम शुरू से शुरुआत करते हैं। डॉक्टर, ये जो जीवीसीज है, ग्लोबल वैल्यू चेन, इस विषय पर आपने 2018 से ही संशोधन या रिसर्च करना क्यों शुरू कर दिया? आज हम लोग इसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन 2018 में आप लोगों को क्यों लगा कि इस विषय पर और चर्चा होनी चाहिए?
Right. So actually, the research for the book started way back. Actually, it's the culmination of a project that we were doing from 2013 to 15. But before I talk about that, let me just talk about why it is important to understand what global value chains are and global supply chains are. Of course, thanks to COVID, we all know that they are important. We
हम्म।
didn't know at that time that they are so important. We have since learned their
तो
importance.
आप
So
समय से थोड़े आगे चल रहे थे।
हाँ।
नहीं, समय से आगे तो नहीं मैं कहूंगी, पर आई थिंक इट वाज द राइट टाइम एक्चुअली। इंडिया पीछे चल रही थी थोड़ी थोड़ी सी।
हाँ, ये बिल्कुल कह सकते हैं। करेक्ट।
ये
Yeah.
सही बात
So
बोली आपने।
yeah. So basically, to understand why global value chains are important, we need to understand the way production has happened traditionally. That you had a firm which sourced inputs locally and then they manufactured. That system has changed completely, and the change has come about because of what are called global value chains. These chains are actually interconnected by firms. So basically, a firm will actually buy some parts, add some value to it, export it, where another firm will add some more value to it, exported to a third country, and then it might actually come back to finally to the first country where it all started, where the branding and the labeling, etc., will happen, and then it might be sent to the final destination. Now, there are, of course, several reasons why this has happened, and I will talk about that also in a little while. I think it's best to start with the, an example, and all of us are familiar with the iPhone. So at the time of writing the book, what we observed that, there are several parts that go into an iPhone. So the chip, for example, was made by Texas Instruments in USA. The audio components by Cirrus Logic in, again, USA and China. Then the glass that covers it, the Corning glass, that was made in Japan. And the semiconductor came from Taiwan. And the touch screen was made in Mexico. And similarly, so you get the idea that, various parts of the iPhone were made in various countries, not various firms only, but various countries. And it is all coming together and getting assembled. Maybe, the whatever the brand is selling it will finally assemble it, put its logo and etc., and then sell it. So this is the concept of a value chain. Basically, it's a series of interconnected chains, but the production doesn't happen in one location. It happens in several locations. And which means that all countries then become interconnected through this means. That the recent thing that we are talking about, the decoupling from China. Very difficult to happen given that the chains are so interconnected and every economy is so interconnected in that sense.
जब मैं आप अभी समझा रहे थे तो मुझे याद आ रहा था कि वो एडम स्मिथ का एक एग्जांपल होता है ना, डिवीजन ऑफ लेबर के रिलेटेड। तो ऐसा लगता है कि उसी चीज को जैसे वैश्विक स्तर पे ये हो रहा है कि इस तरह से हम देख सकते हैं क्या कि दुनिया भर में ये डिवीजन ऑफ लेबर हुआ है और सब देश आके एक साथ मिलके एक कोई प्रोडक्ट को अब बना रहे हैं।
Right,
मतलब
it is almost
वो हाँ, एज ए देश तो वो नहीं पार्टिसिपेट कर रहे, वो तो एक फर्म की तरह से ही पार्टिसिपेट कर रहे हैं, बस उनका दूसरे देशों में होना बस एक है।
हाँ, it is actually extending the concept of the division of labor in that sense. But you put it rightly that it's not between firms per se. It is firms in different countries. And the reason, again, so I'll come to the reason why this has happened. Of course, it has, we are familiar or we know the reasons. One is that, the ICT revolution, communication has become very easy. Then transport has become easy, including, land transport, port transfers from ports. Then there are tariffs throughout the world. The import duties or tariffs have come down, and the costs associated with non-tariff measures have also come down. And other than that, basically the liberalization of trade and other demand-side factors have all played a role in making, every country part of what are called, there are these factory Asia, factory America. So it's like it's happening in a particular region. So factory America refers to, America, the USA, Mexico, and other countries. And factory Asia would, the leader is China, of course. But then you have other countries like South Korea and Taiwan, etc., all part of factory Asia.
ठीक, तो इसमें एक और चीज बताइए डॉक्टर रे। तो जैसे ये आपने बताया कि ये पूरा का पूरा पूरी दुनिया में होने लगा और शायद मतलब कंटेनराइजेशन हो गया है, जिसकी वजह से ग्लोबल सप्लाई चेन और सामान को एक देश से दूसरे देश में भेजना वगैरह बहुत आसान हो गया है। तो वो एक कंटेनर की इजाद ने तो बहुत बड़ा रोल मेरे ख्याल से प्ले किया ही है कि ग्लोबल लॉजिस्टिक्स बहुत आसान हो गया। और प्लस आपने जैसा बोला कम्युनिकेशन की वजह से आप कोलैबोरेट कर सकते हैं अक्रॉस द कंट्रीज अभी इतना आसानी से, तो वो लैग भी चला गया है, तो आपको एक ही जगह पे सब कुछ बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है। पर ये किस तरह से होता है कि ये चीज मेक्सिको में ही बनेगी, ये चीज ताइवान में बनेगी, तो इस तरीके की कॉम्पिटेंसी या इस तरीके का कंसंट्रेशन किस तरह से दुनिया में बन रहा है? ये देशों की वजह से बन रहा है, फर्म्स की वजह से बन रहा है, या वो ज्योग्राफी और देश में कुछ नेचुरल एडवांटेजेस हैं? ये कैसे हो रही है प्रक्रिया?
Yeah, so to understand that, actually there are so we have these chains, and the chains are actually there are typically two types of chains that we talk about in the GVC literature. And one is called the producer driven chains, and the other is the buyer driven chains. So in industries like electronics, auto, etc., the producer driven chains are more predominant, while in sectors like garments or other labor intensive sectors, it is the buyer driven chains. Now, in each of these cases, what you have at the top of the chain is what is called a lead firm. And we know this, there are many examples of lead firms that we are all familiar with. We may not be using this term that frequently, but the lead firm decides many things, including where to locate the production, who to source it from, and it's of course based on the economics of it, but also things like logistics, etc., play a very important role in this whole
और लीड
chain.
फर्म को जैसे जो OEM बोलते हैं, जिसको जो ओरिजिनल इक्विपमेंट
Exactly,
मैन्युफैक्चरर, वही हो गया
exactly.
ना?
Yeah.
हाँ,
So in the
वही
case of
lead firm हो
auto,
गया। हाँ,
in the case of auto, it is the OEM, which is the other term that is used.
that is
So
popular।
yeah, so to decide, how does the lead firm actually decide this, or what are the three things that the firms must do? So there are three things which are said that the three factors, I would say: the capacity of a country to join a GVC, the capacity of a country to remain in the GVC, and the capacity of a firm to upgrade or move up the value chain, so to speak. Now, in the first case, the capacity of a country or a firm to join a GVC, again, that depends on a host of factors, but basically the tasks that each of the those countries' firms can do. And here the competition is really fierce, which means that it is based purely on costs. And it could include, even time cost. We
Right.
typically understand cost only in economic terms, but time is also a critical element of this, and time cost is.
हाँ, कि कौन जल्दी सप्लाई कर सकता है।
बिल्कुल. And the second thing is that capacity to remain in the GVC. उसमें दो चीजें हैं. Basically, the identification of tasks that the of manufacturing that can be done in producer driven chains, and identifying the suppliers in the buyer driven chains. So in either case, the role of the lead firm becomes very important, because this will be identified by the lead firm actually. And then the capacity to move up the value chain will depend on the learning or the upgrading that happens. Basically, whether you are doing some imbibing some technology, you are adopting some best practices, etc. Only then, as you add more value, you will be able to outcompete the other firms or other countries and remain in the chain.
ये काफी सही था जो डिवीजन आपने बताया। मैं इससे जुड़ा हुआ एक सवाल पूछ रहा था कि जैसे आपकी जो किताब है उसके अलावा मैंने सिर्फ एक और चीज पढ़ी है, जो रिचर्ड बॉल्डविन के कुछ पेपर्स हैं इस विषय पर। तो वो कहते हैं कि ये जो ग्लोबलाइजेशन का दौर है, ये दूसरा दौर है। पहले भी ग्लोबलाइजेशन था, जैसे हम लोग बात कर सकते हैं, पहले कॉलोनियल टाइम्स में भी ग्लोबलाइजेशन था शायद। तो और वो स्टीम इंजन की वजह से पॉसिबल हुआ था। तो उस ग्लोबलाइजेशन और आज के ग्लोबलाइजेशन में कुछ अंतर है क्या?
नहीं, अंतर तो नहीं है. It's only that the mode has changed slightly, I would say that. See, in fact, he's right. I mean, Professor Baldwin has been talking about this for a long time, and I mean there have been others also, that there have been several epochs of globalization, and the epoch that we are seeing now is, I mean, obviously because we are seeing it now, we are more interested in this, but this is also perhaps not the height of globalization in some sense. We've had, in one sense, we've had the most globalized the world was just before the First World War, because everything was, yes, exactly, in 1913, in some sense. Yeah, because there was movement of people as well.
इस तरह से
Which is
फ्री था
not,
ना,
which is
पासपोर्ट और वीजा नहीं था तब, बिल्कुल.
exactly. So if you look at the factors of production, I mean, capital and labor, I mean, capital has always been moving more freely,
वो
but
तो
labor
globally
is
है,
not.
हाँ.
Yeah.
Correct.
So and so in terms of that, it's not really the height. But anyway, to answer your question, that what is different, one is, of course, again, as I said, that the nature of production is definitely different, because you didn't do this kind of outsourcing, reshoring, or nearshoring, or whatever you want to call that. That is
और पहले डॉक्टर रे ज्यादा, आई मीन अगर आप देखें तो मूवमेंट जैसे रॉ मटेरियल कमोडिटी आ रही है और फिर आप लोकली फिनिश्ड गुड्स बना रहे हैं, इस तरीके का ज्यादा नहीं था. आई मीन ये तरीके की जो वैल्यू चेन है कॉम्प्लेक्स की, जहां पे इंटरमीडिएट गुड्स बनते रहेंगे इधर से उधर, ये थोड़ा ज्यादा मॉडर्न फिनोमिना है, आपको लगता है?
Absolutely. So earlier what you had was the Fordist system of production and all that. So we've moved from the M form of the factory, the U form of the factory, etc., to what are called the lines, production lines now. And so it's basically like an assembly process. So each and since you're from the auto industry, you know that very well, that how a car is manufactured, that there are parts that are put in and then it goes to the next station in some sense, and sometimes they take out things and then put them back again. So it's like an assembly line or a chain. Now instead of doing that in one factory or in one location, what you are doing now is that you are doing it in several countries or several locations. And of course it is cheaper to do it. That is why you're doing it. You wouldn't do it if it was more expensive to do it.
Bilkul,
right.
Bilkul.
So because I mean, you are also internalizing the transport costs and the other associated costs. Correct. Right. So it is even cheaper. I mean, taking all that into consideration to do this. So this is the difference, maybe in this epoch, that you didn't have this. And again, because of the factors that I just mentioned, that the cost of transports have come down, in communication is better and all that, which you didn't have earlier.
क्योंकि और जैसे ऑटो का तो एग्जांपल लें तो मतलब अगर हम हमारे दर्शक समझना चाहते हैं, उसमें ऑलमोस्ट जो आपका फाइनल ओईएम होता है, जैसे कोई भी टाटा, महिंद्रा वगैरह, मतलब उसमें सारे पार्ट्स कार के कोई ना कोई स्पेशलाइज्ड लोग बना रहे होते हैं, राइट? तो उसमें क्या कहते हैं, कॉन्टिनेंटल की ब्रेक आ रही होगी, बॉश का वाइपर आ रहा होगा, डेंसो से कुछ और आ रहा होगा, कोई प्लास्टिक का पार्ट बना के भेज रहा होगा, कोई पेट्रोल की टंकी बना के भेज रहा होगा. इस तरह से मतलब सैकड़ों लोग इन्वॉल्व होते हैं, और वो भी जो बना रहा होगा उसके भी अलग नीचे 5 लोग होंगे जो कि उसके लिए अलग अलग पार्ट बना रहे होंगे. और ज्यादातर जगह पे इकोनॉमी ऑफ स्केल क्यों आ रही है? क्योंकि जो भी वो लोग वो पार्ट बना रहे हैं, वो सिर्फ एक टाटा, या वो हो सकता है टाटा के लिए भी बना रहा है और महिंद्रा के लिए भी बना रहा है और फोर्ड के लिए भी बना रहा है, तो उसको इकोनॉमी ऑफ स्केल मिल रही है क्योंकि वो ब्रेक इतने सारे कार्स में जा रही है. और अब तो लोगों को समझ में आ गया, जैसे अभी नई लोग देखेंगे ब्रेजा और हाई राइडर, टोयोटा और मारुति ने गाड़ी निकाली है कि भाई नेक्स्ट एवोल्यूशन आ रहा है जहां पे वो लोग बोल रहे हैं भाई बस गाड़ी में थोड़ा मोटा फर्क करेंगे हम, लेकिन गाड़ी का प्लेटफॉर्म पूरा हम शेयर ही कर लेंगे ताकि हमारे और सप्लायर्स जो है उनका वॉल्यूम बढ़ सके. तो उनका कितना वॉल्यूम बढ़ेगा उतना हमको सस्ती चीजें मिलती जाएंगी. तो इस तरह से आप वॉल्यूम बढ़ाने के लिए ये भी शायद एक रीजन हो सकता है कि एक अलग अलग देशों में चीज जा रही है, क्योंकि वो मेक्सिको से जो चीज बन रही है वो सिर्फ यूएस में नहीं जा रही है, पूरी दुनिया में हो सकता है वो सप्लाई हो रही होगी, तो उसको इतना बड़ा ट्रांसपोर्ट एडवांटेज की वजह से वॉल्यूम मिल रहा है कि उसका फिर फायदा पूरी सप्लाई चेन को हो गया। ये ठीक डिस्क्रिप्शन है डॉक्टर?
Yeah, it is absolutely the perfect description, except there is one thing in the auto industry which makes it slightly different. The parts are very bulky, and so there are certain parts that you would actually not say, you're making them in India, you would not like to send them to Mexico because बहुत दूर है।
so और बहुत भारी है।
बहुत भारी भी है, बहुत दूर भी है, so बहुत टाइम भी लगेगा। So in the auto industry, what happens is that you have this structure that there is the lead firm, which is the brand name that all of us are familiar with. It could be the Tatas, or it could be whatever but then there are these tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers who are actually supplying to the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. But because the parts are bulky, the chain, the value chain in the auto industry is actually more regional than global. And it doesn't go like that far. And it's more regional, plus it might be actually countries, initially when they start manufacturing automobiles, they will import certain parts, but slowly try to localize it more and more as the competency of the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers increase. So this is ye khasiyat automobile industry ki hai, that the ancillary firms have to be located actually near the OEM and supply to the OEM. And we are all familiar with the clusters that are there, of auto manufacturers in the country. So you have the Gurgaon, Manesar, you have Pune, and then you have
Pune,
Chennai, maybe.
Bangalore bhi hai.
Yeah. So there are 4-5 prominent locations, but then all the their tier 1, tier 2 suppliers are usually from that in that region.
इनफैक्ट टोयोटा ने तो शुरू किया था, राइट, कि वो अपने ही कंपाउंड में जगह भी दे देते थे अपने सप्लायर को कि भाई इस बगल में ही लगा ले तू फैक्ट्री।
Right. But because then that you can get that part immediately. And and so the other thing that has happened in the auto industry is what is called so the inventory management has also taken a slightly different form than other industries. And the concept of just in time has actually been used very because again it's very difficult and very maybe space intensive to store parts, big parts, right? So you procure things from nearby and only for the batch that you are producing. You don't want to keep a long a larger inventory. And which is why if you recall last year when there were the slowdown that happened because in the chips and all the electronic parts of the car deliveries also got delayed because the concept of just in time was actually breaking down because of the bottlenecks or the supply.
उनके पास लोकल बफर ही नहीं था, माल ही नहीं था, तो थोड़ी सी भी सप्लाई चेन गड़बड़ हो गई तो पूरी प्रोडक्शन रुक जाती है।
बिल्कुल। So that is what happened. So I think the important thing to understand is that every sector is slightly different, and the chain will also represent that sector's uniqueness. And the just in time is one clear example that is it's prevalent in the auto but not so much in some of the other industries.
तो प्रोफेसर मैं तो इससे तो मुझे ऐसा समझ में आ रहा है कि अगर कोई भी फर्म ये सोचेगी कि अगर मुझे ये चीज़ कहीं दूर से मंगवाने से भी अगर वो सस्ती पड़ सकती है, मैं दूसरे देश से मंगवा सकता हूँ और मुझे सस्ती पड़ेगी, तो वो चाहेंगे कि वो कहीं और से भी लेकर आए। लेकिन अगर वो करना मुश्किल हो रहा है, उससे बेटर आप वहीं पे बनाओ, वो ज़्यादा फ़ायदेमंद है, तो ऑब्वियसली वो वही सिलेक्ट करेंगे। तो एक तरीके से देख सकते हैं कि बहुत ज़्यादा हाइपर कॉम्पिटिटिव एनवायरनमेंट का भी नतीजा है शायद GVCs की हर फर्म अपने हर पर्टिकुलर पार्ट के कॉस्ट को और ऑप्टिमाइज़ करना चाह रही है। तो ये तो बहुत ही जैसे आपने समझाया कि बहुत ही कॉम्पिटिटिव एनवायरनमेंट होगा, तो इसमें जुड़ने से कोई फर्म को या कोई कंट्री को कैसे फ़ायदा होगा इतने कॉम्पिटिटिव एनवायरनमेंट में होने से? उसके कोई फ़ायदे हैं क्या? उनको क्या एडवांटेज मिल सकता है ओवर अ लॉन्ग पीरियड ऑफ टाइम?
There are lots of advantages. Actually, one of the things one must understand, and which is why the firms are actually competing with each other to become suppliers to either OEMs or become lead firms themselves if they can actually. And it also brings back to the question of the domestic capability in a country and its whole where its manufacturing sector is going. Oh, by the way, there are GVCs also in services. We talk largely about manufacturing goods, but it's not true only that GVCs are there in manufactured goods. They are there in services as well. Now, the advantage, one of the most advantageous things is that access to technology. And you see what happens is that, and it basically, suppose you look at it this way, that when we started the Maruti factory, we did not have a domestic manufacturing capability. So basically, it was a collaboration between the government of India and Suzuki. And initially, it was difficult to, we did not have the technology also, right? And many of the parts were actually, we could not produce in the country. Now, because of the setting up of the Maruti Suzuki factory, it has helped build up the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers in the country. It has brought us on the map of manufacturing of automobiles, and that has of course happened because the transfer of technology has happened. And so one is the transfer of importance of technology. The other thing is that if you can actually, as a supplier, if you can supply to the world. Now, and I'll take the example of Bangladesh here as far as garments is concerned, because Bangladesh has moved up. It's very well entrenched in the global value chains of garments. It is now exporting about, its share is about roughly twice of India's, whereas India's share is actually declining. And it is its garments are being, it's not that every second garment is made in Bangladesh, but a lot of garments are made in Bangladesh. And so it has got that access to the market. And so there are 2-3 things we are right away seeing, that the technology becomes, you get access to the technology, you get access to market, you get access to finance, and you are actually also helping build up your local industry. And especially in the case of a country which maybe, it needs manufacturing jobs are so important. And if it can actually build up on its labor-intensive manufacturing industries by integrating into global value chains, it can also provide a source of employment. All in all, there are these advantages. Of course, there are some downsides as well, and we saw that during COVID, that being interconnected has its own problems. So I hope that answers your question.
हाँ, तो डॉक्टर है, मेरा एक जुड़ा हुआ सवाल था। जैसे आपने बताया जस्ट इन केस के बारे में, जस्ट इन टाइम के बारे में, तो सौरभ और ख्याति, इसको हम लोग हिंदी में कैसे बोलेंगे? जब चाहिए तब इन्वेंट्री, क्या बोलेंगे? जितना चाहिए उतना,
जितना चाहिए उतना।
हाँ, जितना चाहिए उतना, है ना? तो मतलब अभी तक सब इंडस्ट्री, जैसे ऑटो में आपने बोला जस्ट इन टाइम, जितना चाहिए उतना ही इन्वेंट्री रखते थे, लेकिन अब काफी बात हो रही है जस्ट इन केस की। मतलब इसको अब हिंदी में कैसे बोलेंगे? जस्ट इन केस मतलब कुछ प्रॉब्लम हो जाए तब, जब गड़बड़ हो जाए तब, शायद उस तरीके की इन्वेंट्री। खैर, तो ये जो बदलाव आ रहा है उस वजह से काफी लोग कह रहे हैं कि जो ये कॉम्प्लेक्स सप्लाई चेन है ये बहुत प्रॉब्लमैटिक है, हमें ज्यादा से ज्यादा चीजें लोकल होनी चाहिए वगैरह वगैरह। तो इसे कैसे समझा जाए, ये जस्ट इन टाइम टू जस्ट इन केस, क्या सच में ऐसा बदलाव हो रहा है या फिर ये सिर्फ हम अभी सुन रहे हैं क्योंकि कोविड-19 आया था?
Partly it was because of COVID, because what we have seen that see what happened immediately after COVID. I think many countries went into a lockdown. Then the transport was really badly hit. Then your demand also shrank. So I mean, basically, for the first time you saw the fragility of the supply chains. And so the downside that I was actually referring to just before that, there are these downsides. So the concept that has now come about is what we call resilience of value chains. And I don't know what is the Hindi for that. But basically that, even if there is a shock, even if there is a disturbance, how quickly do you bounce back? Right. That is the concept of resilience. So what this basically means is this, I mean, the concept resilience, of course, is not new, right? You had it, except that you did not have it for, or you did not need to have it for supply chains. And it is very important that so basically, so the concept of resilience is of course not new. It's just that it has become critical now. And we saw the downsides of the interconnectedness because of COVID. Lots of countries had imposed export controls on many of the things, starting from your PPEs and masks and whatever you have. Slowly countries have gone back, and none of the controls etc are there. Even world trade has bounced back. But what it has what COVID has taught us is that resilience has become the absolute buzzword and very important. So I think going forward, apart from the other things that firms will do, in keeping, I mean, in fact they are now questioning the just in time kind of concepts as well. But they and because of the concept of resilience, they will keep this in mind, that your resilience also is one other factor that you have to ensure, apart from the other things, the costs etc, everything. Because without that, actually your costs might increase, or there may be delays or etc. And I mean, unforeseen events, how do you bounce back from them?
बिल्कुल, कि मतलब रोज रोज तो आपकी कॉस्ट कम है, लेकिन अचानक से झटका लगा तो पता चला आपको 4 दिन की प्रोडक्शन ही चली गई आपकी।
Right, absolutely. And then you might need to rethink your suppliers also. Would you like to get them supplied from someone who's nearby, or is it so basically what Khyati was saying, that would it be local? So one of the concepts that has again become much more prevalent now is this whole the nearshoring, basically what people are calling friendshoring. Basically so again, it's in some sense it's the concept of the regional value chain, except that it might be even more local than before.
या फिर जियोपॉलिटिकल बाउंड्री में, कि भाई जहाँ दोस्ताना रिश्ते हों, कि भाई क्योंकि अब जैसे यूक्रेन के साथ लड़ाई हुई तो गड़बड़ हो गई, और चाइना के साथ सबकी तनी हुई है, तो भाई कभी भी वो आपकी गर्दन मरोड़ सकते हैं। तो भाई ये सब अब पॉलिटिकल फैक्टर्स भी जो हैं वो बिजनेस डिसीजंस में आ गए हैं।
देखिए, पॉलिटिकल फैक्टर्स तो हमेशा से ही थे, राइट? अच्छा. And in fact, in the context of the auto industry, where you would locate the your tier 1, tier 2 suppliers sometimes was also decided by political considerations. So the fact that it has not been there is to say that is incorrect. You're right that it has become much more important. But then again, what the Ukraine war or what the China's example has shown us is that suppose even if we want to keep all, say, the entire chain in friendly countries, it may not be possible to do that in certain industries. In certain industries it might, but not in all industries, right? And but definitely some redrawing of the value chains are happening.
तो इसी से मेरा जुड़ा हुआ सवाल था कि एक तो जैसे रेजिलियंस, मैं सोच रहा था शायद हिंदी में उसे सुदृढ़ कह सकते हैं, तो कैसे सप्लाई चेन को और सुदृढ़ बनाया जाए। लेकिन उसमें एक चीज आ जाती है जैसे कि हम लोग बोल रहे थे अलग अलग सप्लायर्स काफी ग्लोबलाइज तौर पर मौजूद हैं, और लेकिन अब हम लोग चाहते हैं कि ये जो इतनी लंबी चौड़ी कॉम्प्लेक्स सप्लाई चेन थी वो अब एक प्रॉब्लम हो गई है और उसे हमें अब छोटा करना है किसी तरीके से। लेकिन इसमें 2-3 एक्टर्स इन्वॉल्व है ना, जैसे एक तो आपने बोला फर्म्स जो हैं वो ऑलरेडी ये डिसाइड कर रही होंगी कि ठीक है अब हम लोग जस्ट इन टाइम नहीं कर सकते, जस्ट इन केस में भी हमें ध्यान देना है। लेकिन अब सरकारें इसमें हस्तक्षेप कर रही हैं और सरकारें बोल रही है कि नहीं, तुमको और रेजिलिएंट बनाना है सप्लाई चेन वगैरह वगैरह। तो इसमें आप सरकार का रोल क्या देखती हैं? फर्म्स ऑलरेडी ये डिसीजन ले ही रहे होंगे उनके बिजनेसेस के लिए, तो किस बिना पर सरकार का हस्तक्षेप वाजिब है? क्या कोई ऐसे कारण है जो फर्म्स एंटिसिपेट नहीं कर पाते और इसीलिए सरकारों को रेजिलिएंट बनाना चाहिए सप्लाई चेन्स को?
Right. So actually, see, again, there the issue is governments have always been there. I mean, not maybe so proactively, but every country has had some kind of industrial policy. It has had an FDI policy. It has had its policy towards land, labor, etc. Now, what is critical is in the context of GVCs, and I will in fact talk about what India is also doing in this in a moment, is that since every country is now trying to be part or get some benefits, the reason why they're doing it is that it is very difficult to export without being part of the value chain. And this has been in fact one of the problems India has been facing also. India's share in global value chains has been limited given its manufacturing capability and the size of the country. And there are various reasons for that. We can go into that. And so what has happened, and we see that again also not only in the country, in the context of India, even countries like USA are now rethinking, and the days of industrial policy per se are back in some sense with the CHIPS Act of the USA or other
इंडिया की PLI scheme है वगैरह.
Exactly. So India has announced similarly 13 sectors for its PLI. And if you see each of that, it's very different and it's tailor-made for each sector. Now, what did we have before? We had the new manufacturing policy, etc. But it was like a blanket policy. Now, what is very critical in the context of GVCs that you not only have these horizontal measures that which are important, vertical measures are also very important, and sector specific and GVC specific policies are also very critical. Now, so there are things like, okay, I mean, if logistics is important, that affects all industries equally, right? But then logistics actually affects some industries more than others. And because the concept of just in time and the timeliness of it becomes more critical in some industries as opposed to other industries.
Can you give an example just to make it?
So for example, I'll again give the example of garments actually. See, timeliness is very important because and there's something that the garment industry has done, which is very interesting. That the packaging that you are doing earlier, what you had is that used to fold a garment and put it into a box, and but there is the new format is you pack it in hangers, and so you can just remove the outer covering or whatever, etc., and it can be directly just put it on in the store. That saves time. Now the reason why that is important is because in the garment industry, fashion dictates everything, and for certain high value branded products, you want them to be on the shelf sooner than later, and which is why the timeliness is more critical in some sense in the case of the garment industry than say other industries.
जैसे वो जिसको
Now,
फास्ट फैशन बोलते हैं, वो पता चला सीजन ही चला गया उस ड्रेस का, अगर आपने लेट
because
भेजी, वो
exactly,
2 महीने का तो
yeah,
सीजन है, तो वो 60 दिन
हाँ,
में अगर आपने 10 दिन की सप्लाई लेट हो गई, तो आपके पास 50 ही दिन बचे बेचने के।
yeah, so the stores will actually change their every 14 days they will change the
हाँ, कुछ जगह तो
collection.
इतना तेज है।
So which
हाँ,
means
Zara
that
वगैरह ने
it
जैसे
has
किया।
exactly. So and they are the lead firms, by the way. They are the OEMs or in the garment industry.
हाँ, फास्ट
Right?
फैशन के सरताज
Yeah.
हैं Zara वगैरह। हाँ,
Right. So now to go back to Pranay's question, basically, then what it means is that now, of course, all this has to be provided by the government. Ensuring that there is quick turnaround in ports or the infrastructure, etc. That has to be done by the government. That was always being done, except that the only difference now, I would say, is that these policies which are tailor-made or specific to these sectors. And again, we can talk about the PLI scheme, but then not only the PLI scheme, now the Indian government has several schemes for each of the sectors. So you have, in the case, say, of the EVs, for example, the electric vehicles, you have FAME 1, FAME 2, you have PLI. So you have so many of these schemes. And so it is not only to ensure that you are part of the value chain, but also to remain competitive, to remain or produce products which your consumers, your domestic consumers, are also going to find appealing and buy, because otherwise you might end up importing them. Right? Because even with duties, it is possible to import even everything nowadays.
sure.
Right?
Hi, hello everyone. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Varta Lab, Akash and Naveen are joined by Shubhra Chatterjee, aka History Wali. This one's filled with many delicious food stories, so all the foodies out there make sure to tune in. On A Niche Thing, Anish talks to Svetlana Nordial, Programming Director Asia at Mubi. The duo answers the most asked question right now, what to watch. They give a list of 5 iconic movies worth checking out. On Nankari, Sadaf and Archit host Ishwar Vikas, the co-founder and CEO of Mukunda Foods. The trio discusses revolution in the food space and the introduction of automation in kitchens. On The Habit Coach, Ashton talks to Raju Sajnani, founder of Enhancing Human Potential. They discuss what is leadership and how one can be a positively impactful leader. And on Think Fast, Varun and Suchita discuss WhatsApp allowing one to message oneself, Spotify Wrapped, and more. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcasts.com. We have some exciting stuff for you. Follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, spread the word. Tell your friends and don't forget to rate and review them wherever you're listening to them. You'll also find all our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcasts. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week, Kotak Privy League Program and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you for making this possible.
हाँ, तो सरकार का ये रोल, लेकिन जैसे आपने जो हॉरिजॉन्टल और वर्टिकल जो क्लासिफिकेशन बताया, हॉरिजॉन्टल तरीके पर ही कितनी सारी चीजें हैं जो अभी तक सरकार ने नहीं किया ना। शायद जैसे मैं पढ़ते रहता हूँ, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स में कॉस्ट डिसेबिलिटीज की बात करते हैं, तो जैसे जीएसटी नहीं है इलेक्ट्रिसिटी पर, तो इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कॉस्ट ज्यादा है, या फिर लैंड, लेबर, फैक्टर मार्केट्स जो हम अक्सर बातें करते हैं, तो वही चीजें जो हैं जो हर सेक्टर में फायदा करेंगी, वो तो काफी बार सरकारों ने किया। इंपोर्ट ड्यूटीज इनफैक्ट हम लोग बढ़ा रहे हैं पिछले सालों से। तो ऐसी हालत में ये वर्टिकल चीजें करने की बजाय हम लोग को हॉरिजॉन्टल चीजें फिक्स करना चाहिए। क्या ये सरकार की प्राथमिकता नहीं होनी चाहिए?
Actually, in my view, you have to do both. You have, but then there are these some reforms are more difficult than others. And agar aap, if you take the case of the factor markets, they are really difficult to bring changes in, and it may take much more time. It is far more, in some sense, it's easier to do some of the other things which the government actually seems to be doing. Now, see, then basically it boils down to what is the objective of all of this. That do you want to be a global player? Do you want to, you want to increase the share of exports, your share of exports in the world? You want to be a player, a globally connected country, which means that some of the value chains will be located in your country. So if you want to do all of that, you may have to do both the horizontal things and some of the difficult things and some of the easy things and some of the sector specific things. It's just, and then mind you, some of them might work and some of them might not work. Despite having a policy, we've seen in the past that just having a policy does not ensure that it will work. On the ground, there are other things that might work. Some may work, some may not work. So, but you have to have that, the entire gamut of things. And in fact, one of the things we've talked about this in the book, that India's approach to GVC has actually been very piecemeal so far. And rather what is needed is a much more holistic approach, and which means that our trade policy, our industrial policy, our technology policy, all needs to be aligned together. And in some sense, I would in fact go as far to say that even our foreign policy actually needs to be aligned. Because, if it is not aligned, then you'd have that, you're like 2 steps forward, 1 step backward kind of situation. Because you might have these contradictions then, that you're doing something in your technology policy which is actually getting contradicted, maybe if you have this piecemeal approach in your industrial policy. And so the whole, you need to have the whole of the chain approach, and you need to look at it in this very holistic manner. And I think there are some attempts definitely to do some of the things, but maybe some more, factor market reforms have not happened, mostly. We are still not talking about land that much, actually, and the land reforms have, availability of land, the ease of availability of land, etc. All of that has not happened that much. And even the other things that, ease of doing business, this is another thing that we talk about a lot. Now, there are 2 things there. One is that it's it varies by state, from state to state. In certain states, it is really much better than in other states. And you do see that a lot of investment, etc., is coming into certain states. But apart from that, the other thing that we never talk about is that what is the approach of the bureaucracy to all of this? Because ultimately, the decisions on the ground are taken by the bureaucracy. Is there any incentive for them to take an approach that is holistic? And we never talk about that, actually. What incentives does the bureaucracy have to bring in some of these measures? I'll just give an example. Maybe that helps. So often we've heard in the case of FDI particularly, that India is the second largest recipient of FDI among the developing countries, just after China. And in the context of China, what has been often told is that when a firm, say, is bringing in FDI to China, there would be somebody from the government who's like liaising on behalf of the government throughout the entire process, right? And it makes things much smoother and much easier. But we have never, maybe some states have tried that, but we haven't had that kind of a approach that makes everything smooth. We are trying this, one window clearance kind of approach and all of that, but we haven't still reached that point where there is that incentive for the bureaucracy also to.
इसलिए हिंदुस्तान में आने के लिए फॉरेन कंपनीज जॉइंट वेंचर कर लेती है ना एक बड़ी इंडियन कंपनी से, वो उनका हिंदुस्तान में आदमी हो जाता है फिर.
Yeah, and there have been so many examples, particularly the Japanese. But I mean, they have tried. They brought in such a lot of investment. Our metro rails, etc., and all that. I mean, auto industry is another. But sometimes they found it so difficult, and particularly in some states, right? So I think there is a lot of scope for improvement on this count. Yeah.
हाँ, तो प्रोफेसर अभी थोड़ा सा मे बी हम स्पेसिफिक इंडस्ट्री के रिलेटेड बात कर सकते हैं ताकि थोड़ा आप और डिटेल में बता पाए. तो आपने अभी थोड़ी देर पहले बात की गारमेंट इंडस्ट्री के बारे में, जिसमें बहुत स्कोप है रोजगार जनरेट करने का, खास करके क्योंकि हमारे पास तो अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट बहुत ज़्यादा है और हमारे पास थोड़ा लो स्किल्ड लेबर भी बहुत ज़्यादा है जो इस इंडस्ट्री में अच्छी तरह से यूज़ हो सकता है. लेकिन जैसे आपने कहा कि अभी रिसेंट समय में तो हमारा ग्लोबल वैल्यू चेन में इसमें थोड़ा डिक्लाइन हुआ है, हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स भी थोड़े एज कम्पेयर टू अवर नेबर्स एंड सम अदर कंट्रीज जो थोड़ा बेहतर कर रहे हैं. तो आपने अपनी रिसर्च में क्या पाया कि क्या ऐसी मेन चीजें हैं जिसकी वजह से हम थोड़ा पीछे रह रहे हैं इस पर्टिकुलर सेक्टर में?
Right. In fact, the garment industry is a very important industry. Every country at the start of their industrialization process actually starts with garments. It's like the stepping stone or the ladder or whatever you want to call it. So Japan has done it, South Korea has done it. See, we have a huge garment industry, but our share in exports has been declining. And whereas the share of other countries, like Bangladesh, has been increasing. To understand why this is the case, you have to understand the nature of the industry. Now, the industry is very diverse. So you have things like, basic t-shirts, and then at the higher end, you have things like branded products, right? Which are like where you can the hangers kind of shipment that I was talking about. Now, so it's not really one sector, so to speak. Now, what is important for, say, t-shirts is that you have to be cost competitive. And one of the things that we lose out on in comparison to Bangladesh is that, say, the number of hours that our factories can run, they are much lower than what Bangladesh allows, the shifts. That is the one problem. The second thing is that, India for a long time, it had this regulation that if a firm increases its size to more than 100, there are certain emoluments, etc., that have to be paid to workers. And many firms, etc., have tried to bypass that by building, having several factories of that size, rather than, so scale matters basically in the case of low-cost manufacturing like t-shirts. And there we are again losing out. In fact, one of the things is that our factory sizes, the size of our factories, are quite small compared to the global averages, and even, say, in comparison to Bangladesh. That is one. The other thing is that the quick turnaround in ports. So if the customs clearance, etc., doesn't happen very quickly, that is one major bottleneck. And then, of course, we have this other things that, suppose that there are so many garment clusters in the country. They have to, when they are if they are being transported, through JNPT, it has to reach JNPT or any other port. Sometimes, of course, they're also shipped by air, but then, of course, then that increases the cost. Yeah. So because of this, all of these factors, the timeliness is such a critical factor. And this is where one of the reasons why we are losing out on. And the other very important thing is the dominance of cotton. Now, what happens is that because most of the garments that we are manufacturing are cotton based, we also we have the entire value chain in the country, right from cotton growing to cotton production, textile, to the garments, right? Now, because of this dominance of cotton, it means that you can cater to the US or the EU markets only for one season, the summer season, and not the other seasons. And there, I think we are losing out a lot. And I guess some firms are actually using that to then ship to South American and other kinds of other countries. But the main consumers of garments are, and especially high value garments, are US and EU. They're the largest consumers, and this dominance of cotton is actually holding us back. So what are the things that we need to do actually? I mean, and it's not that the retailers, the branded marketeers are not sourcing from India. They are, but it is actually small in comparison to what they're doing from other countries like Bangladesh. So we need to diversify fabrics. Basically, we have to get into more synthetic and more other kinds of fabrics. We need to collaborate with design studios, because again, for the high branded products, that the design studios located in Italy or other countries, we need to collaborate with that. Some firms are already doing that. I mean, the Delhi NCR, some garment manufacturers are doing that. And then the other thing is that another paper that we have actually done, which has come out recently, is, we've found that actually the important thing as far as competition is concerned in this sector is technology, which means that what is the machine that you're using, or what kinds of machines are you using? Are you using machines to cut? Are you using machines? I mean, we know the stitching machine, of course, but there are machines for design. There are machines for cutting fabric, block of fabric. Then there are also some embellishments, etc. Can be used for. So the finishing of a garment again becomes very important, and there the value addition actually happens there. How good the zipper is, how good the embellishments are. And there I think we are actually lagging slightly, in the sense that we tend to do that by hand. Of course, they sometimes become more niche products that way, but you cannot do a mass scale thing in that way. And so these are some of the reasons why we are sort of lagging behind. There has been a PLI announced also for technical textiles. So some of the questions related to the fabric, etc., maybe they will get resolved in the future.
जो आपने ये शिफ्ट कम होने के बारे में बताया, तो क्या ये हमारे फीमेल लेबर फोर्स के रिलेटेड जो लॉज है उसके साथ जुड़ा हुआ है? क्योंकि
no. Basically, there is regulation that your working hours have to be of say 12 hours or whatever maximum. It cannot be more than that. It's not only females; it's for everybody. Okay. But Bangladesh has shifts which are in excess of that, and we obviously we cannot have that. We have our laws.
दूसरी, लेकिन इसमें मैंने वो देखी है 12 घंटे की शिफ्ट की तो बात ठीक है, पर जैसे हमारे यहाँ रात की शिफ्ट अक्सर गारमेंट फैक्ट्रीज में नहीं चलती हैं, जो कि वियतनाम, बांग्लादेश वगैरह में चलती हैं। थोड़ा सा लॉ एंड ऑर्डर से रिलेटेड है या सोशल इश्यूज से रिलेटेड है, क्योंकि अक्सर औरतें काफी काम करती हैं गारमेंट फैक्ट्रीज में। तो ये आपने ये भी रीजन देखा है गारमेंट फैक्ट्रीज में कॉम्पिटिटिवनेस कम होने के लिए?
No, not necessarily, because see, we have actually, I mean, the other thing is that our women's labor force participation in the country is quite low, actually. And So, but there could be, I mean, I have not gone into why that is so, because there are other people anyway who are looking into it. But it is also a fact that Bangladesh employs a lot of women in their factories. And of course, the moment you talk about women's employment and shifts, extending beyond the normal time, you have to have these considerations, the safety issue, or childcare, if there are, crashes or whatever. Not only that, I mean, I think even transport is an issue, because a lot of women, the reason they've said that they are not working or are not in the labor force is because there are no easy transport facilities for them to go to certain factories and work.
करेक्ट। जैसे हम अक्सर काफ़ी सारे एक्चुअली हमने टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री विजिट की है, तो यूजुअली देखते हैं जैसे जो जहाँ पे थान बनता है या यान बनता है, वो सब तो 3 शिफ्ट चलती हैं, पर जहाँ गारमेंट बनते हैं वो 1 या 2 ही शिफ्ट चलती है, और अक्सर वो 12 घंटे की एक शिफ्ट चला लेते हैं, इस तरह से चलते हैं, क्योंकि गारमेंट में ज़्यादा औरतें दिखती हैं, पर आदमी भी होते हैं, पर औरतें काफ़ी दिखती हैं। पर जो यान और ये सब टाइप की चीज़ें हैं, वहाँ पे मैकेनाइज़ेशन भी बहुत है, और आप उसको मिल को बंद भी नहीं कर सकते, प्रोसेस इंडस्ट्री टाइप से चलती है, तो वो 3 शिफ्ट चलती रहती है, और जिसको कहते हैं मोटा काम होता है। और somehow हिंदुस्तान में थोड़ा एक ऐसा हो गया, बारीक काम होता है तो लोग बोलते हैं औरतों को हायर कर लो करवाने के लिए, मोटा काम होता है तो उसके लिए आदमी लोग हायर हो जाते हैं। तो ऐसा थोड़ा आई डोंट नो बायस है या क्या है, पर ऐसा देखते हैं हम लोग।
Yeah, there is actually a gender dimension and a problem also here, because you see the supervisors will mostly be men, but the workers, the people, I mean the women who are the master tailor, the person who's most important is a man usually.
Correct.
But the people who are working under him are usually women, but partly because of social norms, I guess.
सोशल नॉर्म्स भी हैं, हाँ।
Yeah.
ये खास करके जो एम्ब्रॉयडरी वाला पार्ट होता है ना, वो एक्चुअली लोग अपने घर ले जाते हैं साड़ियाँ,
Right.
और वो घर पे पर पीस उनको बहुत ही कम पैसा मिलता है, मतलब एक पीस का
Exactly.
तो 10 रुपए भी नहीं मिल रहा होगा।
पर ख्याति वो जो घर ले जाने वाले टाइप के जो इंडस्ट्री है, वो मोस्टली आपको डोमेस्टिक टाइप, और ये मतलब यू कांट बी पार्ट ऑफ ये जो एक्सपोर्ट वैल्यू चेन वगैरह का जो स्केल है ना, वो बड़ा मुश्किल है इस तरह से करना।
हाँ, नहीं, मैं बस बता रही हूँ कि ऐसा भी मॉडल हमारे यहाँ चलता है, ऐसा ज्यादा चल रहा है शायद, मे बी इसलिए क्योंकि वो क्वालिटी उतनी बन नहीं पाती। मुझे लगता है कि उसमें घर के सारे मेंबर्स बैठ के थोड़ा सा काम कर लेते हैं ताकि फिनिश हो जाए करके, और तो शायद क्वालिटी का भी उससे असर पड़ता होगा।
बिल्कुल। तो एक्चुअली डॉक्टर, आपने एक बात कही थी, उद्देश्य क्या है इस पॉलिसी का, वो जानना बहुत जरूरी है। तो मेरा सवाल फिर से वहीं पर आता है कि आपके हिसाब से भारत की अभी जो इंडस्ट्रियल पॉलिसी है, या फिर जीवीसी से रिलेटेड जो सवाल, हमारा उद्देश्य क्या होना चाहिए? जैसे जब हम लोग बोलते हैं आत्मनिर्भर, इस आत्मनिर्भर शब्द से हमें लगता है कि शायद सरकार का उद्देश्य है कि इंपोर्ट्स कम होने चाहिए और ज्यादा से ज्यादा चीज हमें बनानी चाहिए। लेकिन जैसे आपने कहा कि जीवीसी में एक बड़ा उद्देश्य होना चाहिए कि क्या हम लोग एक्सपोर्ट कर पा रहे हैं, तो क्या वो उद्देश्य होना चाहिए या डोमेस्टिक वैल्यू एडिशन होना चाहिए? तो ये आप कैसे इसे कंसेप्चुअलाइज करते हैं?
Right. So see, the GVC participation actually will happens either through what is called backward integration or forward integration. Now, India's in fact index of backward integration is slightly higher, which means that we are using imported intermediates in our production rather than our exports being used in third country production. Okay. Now, you can be integrated. I mean, if you are integrated through backward or forward, you are integrated, right? Now, one of the problems I have felt is that we are looking at exports and imports as two separate things, but actually they are same in the context of GVCs. They are, the two sides of the same coin. And also in the particularly for imports, we have to be careful that we have to distinguish between importing of intermediates and importing of, say, consumer goods or capital goods. I can understand that importing of consumer goods is may not be something that is looked upon as very as a good thing, but importing intermediates, if they are going to be used in making something which you will further export, we should not have any problem with that. Also, intermediates of capital goods which you don't produce in the country, we should have no problem with that. Or in importing raw materials which you do not produce in the country or do not have in the country. So now the thing is that, see, how you will view imports will depend again on which is how you view this whole thing. Now suppose you look at it is that, okay, I am importing to export or for domestic consumption. What that is, if you look at it this way, then you would view imports more favorably rather than thinking that all imports are bad, right? And the way in which actually GVC you look at GVC participation is by looking at a sector and seeing whether or not you're exporting and importing, and in the net sense what is happening, you look at it usually that way. So one of the problems is that if we look at these two separately, then there might be this problem that you think that this is bad and this is good, etc. So basically I would then go back to the three things I think are very important and we need to do. One is, of course, the factor market reforms, which we just talked about. We need to increase our ease of doing business, and this means that not only just the policy part of it, but what is actually happening on the ground, right? Difference between your de jure and de facto measures. And of course, I talked about the incentivizing the bureaucracy. And the other thing that we haven't touched on at all is financing infrastructure, but in a sustainable way. So we financing of infrastructure in the country has suffered from many problems. We've tried many models and nothing has worked, and we need to find a whole new way of doing that, and I think we're still trying to grapple with that. But together with all of this, basically comes back to what I said at the beginning, is that a holistic approach to your to not only to GVCs but to exporting. And so basically you link all your policies and align all your policies together, your industrial policy, your trade policy, and your technology policy. And unless you do that, you might run into problems. So then there are other kinds of things that we have not talked about. And so one of the things that we often fear is that competition from China, for example. Now, and I'll come back to the question about Atmanirbharta in that context. Now, see, the thing is that I'll take the example of pharmaceuticals, because that is somewhere I think the things become very clear. So there is this, there are what are called active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs. We import a lot of APIs from China. In fact, we import a lot of, our imports from China are very high, right? And it has often been talked about that why are we not manufacturing these APIs, and can we not do them? But you see, the thing is that and in fact, India used to manufacture some of these APIs, but we have stopped doing that for one reason, because it is cheaper to again source it from China. And we in some sense have moved on to slightly higher in the value chain, where we've bypassed that stage in some sense and gone from manufacturing of APIs to manufacturing drugs which uses this APIs in particular combinations, so your whole formulations, etc. So saying that Atmanirbharta is good, but it cannot be at the, suppose you have actually bypassed that stage, does it make sense then to go back? unless it is for two reasons, unless there are security issues or there is the question of resilience. So without those two considerations, I think being Atmanirbhar in everything is not a good idea. And which means that also the PLI schemes, in the context of the PLI schemes, in fact, I would say that in trying to indigenize the entire chain, will run into the same problems that we've we've encountered in some other cases. So here I'll take the example, say, of the solar PVs. There are parts that we don't have in the country. We don't have good silica material, right? Now, unless we import that, we are not going to be able to manufacture low quality, low cost wafers or modules, etc. Now, does it make sense? I mean, how, if we don't have that material, can we actually manufacture that or produce that then? And of course, the only problem is that in each of these cases, if you take even in the case of, say, the EVs, we see this, that the source country is often China, because actually they have gone ahead and invested in so many of this. If you look at just in the case of batteries, for example, for EVs, the lithium market is controlled by China, though it doesn't have any lithium of its own. But it's just that they've entered the game much ahead of many of the other countries, and now they're controlling that. So it's just that okay, at this point in time, we are trying to indigenize certain things. We are manufacturing many of the things, but I think we need to take a call that it may not be worthwhile to indigenize everything and make everything possible. And many other countries are trying to decouple from China, and they're seeing to their detriment that it is not that easy, and second, where will you find an alternative supplier of those cheap products? I mean, which other country? It will be obviously not one country, it could be several countries, but it may not be as cost effective as others. So in one sense, then you will be hurting the consumers of your country in that way. So it is not a simple, straightforward answer, but it is actually a very complicated process. And in the book, actually, we've talked about what the government needs to do, what firms and associations need to do, and also what kind of, I've talked about the policy, of course, what needs to be done overall. Of course, there is something that consumers have to also be aware of, that, if it is the case that we only want to consume, I mean, there are two things. A, we want to consume cheaper products, in which case it may not be always possible to produce it in the country. Second, we want branded products. Again, there, if you don't have local brands, then you are actually sourcing it from elsewhere. So that's a choice that the consumers are also making, right? So it is a collective process. Firms are involved, governments are involved, consumers are involved, everybody is involved.
तो एक थोड़ा समराइजेशन के लिए मैं बोल सकती हूँ कि ये सारे भी प्रोडक्ट्स जो है, क्योंकि ये नेचर हो चुका है नए मॉडर्न प्रोडक्ट्स का, जैसे कि फार्मास्यूटिकल्स है, बैटरीज है, कि उसमें आप अलग-अलग जगह पे आपका स्पेशलाइजेशन कोई एक फील्ड में ही होगा। जैसे हमारा स्पेशलाइजेशन अभी ड्रग में है कि हम जेनेरिक्स बनाते हैं, हम ये बेटर करते हैं, और अगर हम बोले कि हम हर ही चीज़ करेंगे तो ऑफ कोर्स हम वो अच्छे से नहीं कर पाएँगे। तो हमें और कंट्रीज़ पे थोड़ा बहुत तो डिपेंडेंट रहना ही पड़ेगा, और इसमें अगर हम अपनी रेज़िलियंस बढ़ाना चाहते हैं तो हमें ये सोचना चाहिए कि क्या हम इसका कोई अल्टरनेटिव या दूसरे एक साथ 2 जगह से मंगा सकते हैं, या उस प्रकार से हम सोच के उसकी रेज़िलियंस बढ़ा सकते हैं। लेकिन शायद ऐसा पॉसिबल नहीं, मतलब मुश्किल होगा कि हम बिल्कुल ही सब कुछ ही हमारे देश में बनाना, तो थोड़ा मुश्किल ही होगा आज के इतने कॉम्प्लेक्स प्रोसेसेस के अंदर। तो प्रोफेसर, आप और कौन से सेक्टर्स हैं जिसमें आपको लगता है कि इन सेक्टर्स में भारत का कोई एडवांटेज हो सकता है या भारत इसमें इन्वेस्ट कर सकता है ताकि अगले कुछ दशकों में हम उसमें और अच्छे हमारे लिए जीवीसी में इंटीग्रेट करना हमारा मौका कहाँ है इंटीग्रेशन करने का?
Right. So, in fact, in the book, we've talked about some sectors. We've talked about, electronics hardware, which, in fact, since then we are doing much, much better. And we are not importing all our mobile phones from China. We are manufacturing a lot of our mobile phones in the country. We had also talked about other sectors like aerospace, where there was some potential. But there are some other sectors, there is this atlas of complexity, which the Hausman et al. Basically talk about. And in terms of diversification, India has moved up its complexity index a lot in the last few years. And one or two sectors that they have identified are metals, stone, and machinery. Vehicles we are anyway doing, based on what India's current capability is, and where those are some of the sectors that are of promise. But one sector that I would actually like to talk about, and which hasn't been talked about much, is of course EVs. And actually we've done some work recently looking at about 20 states in India now have a policy towards EVs, and lots of things are happening on that front. That seems, and we are not only talking about four-wheelers actually. In India, the EV revolution in that sense is led by the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers. And so there's a lot of potential.
सबसे ज्यादा तो ई-रिक्शा ही है अभी.
Absolutely, yeah. But then you see, the thing is that we are still not manufacturing the batteries in the country. Right.
और वो ई-रिक्शा की किट भी चाइना से ही आती है यहाँ पे फट से, वो नॉन ब्रांडेड है ई-रिक्शा लेवल पे. थ्री व्हीलर तो बन रहे हैं इंडिया में, बट ई-रिक्शा जो है वो तो बहुत ज्यादा चाइना से आते हैं अनब्रांडेड, और किट लोग असेंबल करके आगे भेजते हैं.
So there are problems there, there have been these instances of fire, etc. So I think that is one area where we need to sort of invest and get into battery manufacturing. And I think there are companies which are talking about that. There's a PLI scheme also in this. So, and of course, in semiconductors, we are hearing a lot of things now. And I think the chairman of Tata's has also said recently that, I think 2-3 days back, that they are going to set up a fabrication facility, also fabrication platform as well. So I think as far as electronics and EVs are concerned, we are actually, this is the way to go. One other thing that, I think I haven't talked about, but is a very important point in India's context, is basically the size of the domestic market. And typically we've seen that countries which have a large domestic market usually have lower participation in GVCs, and other countries like Brazil, etc., also actually have lower participation. So it's not that we may not be part of the global value chains, we may not be exporting that much, but because we are catering to the huge domestic industry that we have, that in some sense, our policy or our orientation is actually geared towards that. But what it would do is that, it sort of, so we need to think about whether we need a different policy for the domestic sector and a different policy for the export sector. And I don't think we've reached a point where actually that we should be doing that, and, sort of having two very different kind of sectors. Because one of the other things that it points back to the question that you asked, Yati, that what is the benefits of integrating in GVCs? Now, one of the benefit comes from the fact that how well the lead firm is integrated through its backward linkages, through its forward linkages in an economy. And the more it is integrated, the more the benefits would flow or accrue to the country, the host country. And having a very, different domestic sector, disparate domestic sector and an export sector may not be warranted. And finally, also we have one area where we have lagged a lot is our EPZs, or export processing zones. We've not had much success at all with them, and I think there have been some recent changes, but they are yet to bear any fruit.
इसमें मुझे डॉक्टर ने
Thank you.
एक चीज आपसे पूछनी थी कि आपने बोला डोमेस्टिक सेक्टर बड़ा होता है तो कभी कभी एक्सपोर्ट कम होता है, पर मुझे ऐसा लग रहा था कि हो सकता है इंटरमीडियरी और जीवीसी का पार्ट बनने में प्रॉब्लम हो सकता है, लेकिन बड़े डोमेस्टिक सेक्टर से ऐसा नहीं होगा कि आप ज्यादा डोमेस्टिक ओईएम्स डेवलप करेंगे क्योंकि लोकल मार्केट ही इतनी अच्छी है, फिर आपको स्केल मिलेगा और आप सस्ती चीज और अच्छी चीज, जैसे जैसे इंडियन टू व्हीलर्स इतने एक्सपोर्ट हो रहे हैं वो हमारी डोमेस्टिक मार्केट का स्ट्रेंथ की वजह से ही एक्सपोर्ट हो रहे हैं ना, तो
No,
वैसा
absolutely.
हमको अपॉर्चुनिटी नहीं आपको लगता है, पर वो जीवीसी का, आप उसको जीवीसी का शायद पार्ट ना माने, हो सकता है
नहीं. See, if we are exporting it, I mean, if we are making the entire thing in the country, then obviously it is not part of a GVC. But I'm not discounting that. In fact, that is very important. But what the main thing there is that, does it lead to the creation of that brand, if that lead firm or the OEM? जैसे कि Mahindra, Tata's, these are the brand names everybody in the world knows about them, right?
बिल्कुल.
But such brand names
हो गए, बजाज के मोटरसाइकिल, सब अफ्रीका, ब्राजील, सब जगह बिक रहे हैं.
Right, but such brand names are not there, say, in garments.
हाँ, वो बात ठीक है.
So that is the point. That is the simple point, that why is it? I mean, suppose our garments are so good, then everybody would know about our jeans or our t-shirts or whatever.
और
we
वो
don't
हमको
have.
वो हमको सवाल शायद पूछना चाहिए ना कि क्यों हम स्कूटर इतने ज्यादा बना के एक्सपोर्ट कर पा रहे हैं, तो वैसे हम फिर कपड़े क्यों नहीं कर पा रहे हैं?
Exactly,
तो
and
कमी रह गई.
इसमें that problem about it comes back to the question about our labor intensive industries. And in our labor intensive industries, we have not had the branding part of it. We have not been that good, or that we've not done so well, actually. So you don't know, nobody, I mean, outside of the country, nobody knows about your flying machine jeans, right? Why is that? But everybody knows even jeans from countries like Turkey or other countries. So that is the limited point, that I mean, both are important, but in order to take that jump, you would need to do the branding part of it, the the marketing part of it, and maybe we haven't done that way
as well.
तो जैसे जो हमारे बड़े गारमेंट वाली कंपनीज है, वो एक्चुअली गैप या ऐसी फॉरेन ब्रांड के लिए कपड़े बनाते होंगे, लेकिन उनके पास वो ब्रांडिंग वाला पार्ट उनका नहीं है, वो एक बड़े ब्रांड के अंडर बनाते हैं. तो हमारे यहाँ से कोई हमारी कोई लोकल ब्रांड जो विदेश में जाके एकदम फेमस हुई है, ऐसा नहीं हो पाया है अभी तक. आप बोल रहे हो कि जब वो होगा तो एक तरीके से, क्योंकि हमारी वो एंकर होगी इंडिया में और उसके आसपास पूरी जीवीसी डेवलप होगी, तो हमें ज्यादा फायदा मिलेगा.
We need our Zaras.
Zara, Uniqlo, ये सब चाहिए हमें.
Exactly,
इंडिया बहुत छोटा है ना ख्याति.
मैं ऐसे ही बोला कि वो ब्रांड दिमाग में आया.
अगर फैब इंडिया यूनिक्लो जितना बड़ा हो जाए या जारा जितना बड़ा हो जाए तो मजा.
Even our generic drugs, for example, everybody knows about our Cipla or Aurobindo Pharma, etc. Everybody knows about our firms, but not in garments.
ठीक है, अंत करते हैं डॉक्टर. बहुत बढ़िया कन्वर्सेशन रहा. तो आपको अगर ऐसे टॉप 3 पॉलिसीज चूज करनी हो, सरकार क्या कर सकती है इस स्पेस में, तो क्या आपकी सलाह रहेगी? मतलब मुश्किल होता है ये छोटा साउंड बाइट जिसको बोलते हैं ना, एकदम हमारी लंबी पुलियाबाजी का छोटा साउंड बाइट चाहिए.
So basically have a approach that is holistic, and which I've talked about in the past, earlier also. factor market reforms have to take place.
Absolutely.
I mean, some of the difficult questions that needed to be addressed have to be addressed sooner than later. And of course, we have to look at our the financing of in a sustainable way about financing our infrastructure. We haven't managed that well enough, I think.
आपने सारे हॉरिजॉन्टल नुस्खे बोले हैं तो
So see, the vertical things have happened actually in some sense that since we wrote that book, so the PLI scheme has come about, which has addressed many of the issues that we raised in the as far as the vertical things are concerned.
बिल्कुल ठीक नहीं, ये बहुत अच्छा। और मेरे ख्याल से एज ए रिसर्चर आपको अच्छा भी लगता होगा कि आपने जो रिकमेंडेशंस करी वो आपको दिख रही हैं होते हुए, तो कहीं हम ठीक डायरेक्शन में जा रहे हैं। तो बहुत मजा आया डॉक्टर रे, बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिला, बहुत ही बढ़िया कन्वर्सेशन था। थैंक यू सो मच आपका हमारे साथ टाइम स्पेंड करने के लिए।
थैंक यू सो मच, आई ऑल्सो एंजॉयड इट।
शुक्रिया।
नमस्कार।